Mr. Smith. Hearing none. Okay, Becker's here, and who else are we missing? Thank you, Miss Apodoni. There she is. Beautiful. Would you care to join us up here? You're going to sit at those tables wherever you want. Um, at this time, oh, thank you. Perfect. And Mr. Hardy, all right. So today we're gathered to review the historic, educational, recreational assets and biodiversity of the Richfield Heritage Preserve. Hey folks, if you don't mind, have a seat. I think I left off at the biodiversity of the Rich Reserve. We can't get where we are going unless we understand where we've been. The challenges of Richfield Heritage Preserve will not be solved here today. That will require collaboration, partnering, alliances, and people, which leads us to our number one asset, people. Without all these good people, we have volunteered their valuable time. The future sustainability of Richfield Heritage Preserve would not be possible. We also need to develop a strategic plan to help guide our decision-making process. A big thank you to the Richfield communities, village and township, all of our partnerships, Friends of Crowhigh-Laka, Richfield Historical Society, Association, Ohio Horsemen's Council, Summit County Chapter, Baldwin-Wallace University, Biology and Geology Departments, Ohio Operating Engineers, Coga Valley Career Center, and attendees for all their support. Thank you to all our presenters and facilitators for their professional time, preparation, and knowledge. Let me introduce you to the facilitators who are helping us with the invasive species management plan here on the property, and they represent our newest partnerships. This plan is essential to the land management of the park. We are thankful for their expertise and commitment. Jennifer Windus is the current president of the Ohio Invasive Plant Council. Heather Steed is the executive of Crane Hollow Nature Preserve in Hocking County. These two professionals have offered to facilitate this review for us today at Richfield Heritage Preserve. I want to thank you for assisting us. We are looking forward to a great day reviewing our knowledge of Richfield Heritage Preserve, and we thank all for attending. For Windus, again, the president of the Ohio Invasive Council, a nonprofit organization formed in 2005 which represents a diverse array of stakeholders. Jennifer retired in 2014 after 31 years at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, working in 3 different divisions: park and recreation, natural areas and preserve, wildlife. Most of her career involved coordination of land management on nature preserves and wildlife areas, which included invasive plant control. She also serves on the board for the Ohio Natural Areas and Preserves Association, Crane Hollow, Inc., and the Ohio Prescribed Fire Council. Jennifer, Bachelor of Science in Forest Biology and a Master of Science in Environmental Biology. She and her family live in Fredericktown in rural Knox County. Heather is the Executive Director of Crane Hollow, a private nonprofit corporation that owns and administers Crane Hollow Nature Preserve. The preserve encompasses 1,900 acres, 1,300 acres of which are dedicated state nature preserve by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Heather serves on the Buckeye Trail Association Board and the Association of Nature Center Administrators Annual Summit Planning Committee. She began her career in the natural resources field, serving as an interpretive park ranger at Smoky Mountains National Park and Blue Ridge Parkway for nearly 10 years. She also has a Master's of Science in Park and Resource Management and resides in the Hocking Hills with her husband and 2 sons. At this time, I would ask that Jennifer and Heather, if you'd please stand to be recognized. Can I turn it over to you? Is this coming?
I'm not very staying in one place, so I'm going to walk around. Thank you very much for having us, for having Heather and I help with this event this morning. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces, but we haven't been involved in this group that long, so it's good to see a bunch of new faces for us too. And we hope to meet all of you today. And if you have any questions about our involvement, our backgrounds, feel free to ask us over lunch. What we're trying to do today is basically help the RJRD board facilitate. This is really a celebration of everything that's been going on for the last many years. It's interesting to me when I look at the history, which Lynn's going to talk a lot about. The folk group formed in 2009, and that was even before this was protected, right? So there has been a lot of energy going into protecting this property, and a lot of work has been done to gather information, and that's really what we're celebrating today, is all the work that has been done for these at least 9 years, maybe longer than that, to gather information about this site and put together many, many pieces involving the history, recreational opportunities, the rich biodiversity, and then where do we go from here. So my job for the day is to try and make sure that not only we learn something about what we've gathered, at the end of the day, help us think about next steps, where we go to form, whether it's a strategic plan or whatever type of plan it is, to help you decide what you want to do. In other words, we can't do everything. And having served on 4 boards myself right now, we all struggle with this problem. Any profit organization, even any state agency, and I've worked for ODNR for 31 years, we all struggle with that. We never have enough resources and we have too much to do, right? Our plates are overflowing. And Heather's going to talk a little bit about, what can happen to us if we keep our plates overflowing, right? We know how much time volunteers are putting into this effort, and when we do too much, over time we burn out. And Heather's going to talk a little bit about that. So planning is the way that helps you avoid burnout. And since we're all very familiar with that, whether it's in your jobs or your volunteer efforts, you need to think strategically ahead of time about how you're going to avoid that. Otherwise, your organization will fall apart, you'll never meet your goals, and that's obviously not what we want to do. So that's, if you think about that today as we go through these different presentations, think about, all the resources and wonderful things that we have here, but then how are we going to move forward to make sure that we maintain it, conserve it for future generations. And I think that's what our goal is for all of that. We want to make sure future generations can appreciate the history, the biological diversity, and just the wonderful resources that you have here. So Heather and I are going to attempt to guide you through this today. We have a very tight schedule, so it was extremely difficult. Meg worked hard, and Beth and a number of other people to put this agenda together. And the person that's speaking could probably easily talk for twice the amount of time they have, right? So Heather's job and my job is to keep it on schedule, and I want to tell you a couple of ground rules that we're going to have in order to make this happen, because if we get off schedule from the beginning, we're going to be here till 10 o'clock at night, right? I don't think any of us want to do that. And our speakers will go home early. So let's have a few ground rules about how we're going to get through the day. One is that if you have any questions while someone is speaking, write them down. Okay, write them on the back of your agenda. Unless a speaker gets done early, which I highly doubt is going to happen, we're not going to have any questions until, all right? Now, if it turns out some of the speakers aren't going to be able to stay all day, so if it turns out that you have dying to ask some questions and the speaker's going to leave early, you might be able to catch them at lunch. But it is really important that we don't get carried away with questions, while we're trying to stay on schedule. And to stay on schedule, Heather made a couple, and this guidance is for the speakers, which I think most of them are here now, is that we're going to watch the time very closely, and when we get to 5 minutes, Heather's going to hold up a yellow card, says 5 minutes, right? And then we're going to get to 1 minute, and Heather's going to hold up a red card, all right? And that means you need to be wrapping it up. When we're out of time, we're either going to drag you off, or we're going to, Beth's going to ring the bell. But it is really important that we stay on schedule, okay? And I know that's going to be hard because, like I said, each speaker could talk a lot more than what they, are assigned to talk today. And then the other thing is that, as we, again, just keep in mind that we are going to have time for questions at the end. And what we're hoping, Heather and I have already discussed this, towards the end, we think we can carve out a little bit of extra time to have more than 15 minutes for questions. Again, next steps from this meeting to think about, what type of planning process can the RJRD board go through along with folk to be able to make some hard decisions. Okay, so what's on the top of the list? What's on the bottom of the list? And you're going to be overwhelmed with information today, and you're going to want to do all of it. Oh, I want to make sure we save all the biodiversity. I want to make sure we implement trade. There are going to be choices to be made, and that's what we're going to hopefully get you to the end. And that's why write your questions down. You don't want to forget them because there's going to be a lot of information, and then be ready to bring them up at the end of the day. Heather is now going to give you a brief presentation about Crane Hollow because essentially I involved in this through the Invasive Plants Council, and Beth will probably explain that to you later, but we have a listserv, and she put a question out there about grapevines, and it went from there to invasive plants and planning. And then I kind of dragged Heather into it because Heather and I are both involved with Crane Hollow. I'm on the board, and she's the executive director, and she's a lot of planning experience because when she talks to you about Crane Hollow, we have done a ton of planning at Crane Hollow. And I think if she explains to you a little bit about what we do at Crane Hollow and why it's such a special place and how it overlaps with this property, you'll be able to see how she's going to be able to offer a lot to this process.
All right, I try to move around too, so don't laugh if I trip over these cords up here. All right, so thanks everybody for having me. I know it seems strange that a preserve from Hocking County would take an interest in a preserve up here, but I hope through this presentation you'll get to see all of the amazing connections between our two sites. So Crane Hollow Preserve has about 2,000 acres, and we are in the center of Hocking County. So if you think about the places that you associate with Hocking County, like Ash Cave, Conkle's Hollow, we are just right next door to all those places. And this is one of our favorite waterfalls in the preserve, and we have about 50 waterfalls, not all this big, but there's about 50 of them anyway. So this shows you how we fit in Ohio. So right down here is the Ohio map, and then you can see the outlined area there of Hocking County, and then even within Hocking County, a green oval over it that shows the geological boundaries of the Hocking Hills. And that's what you think of, those sandstone cliffs, those rocky outcroppings, that's all part of it. And so within that red dot within Hocking County is Crane Hollow. And then we look at the land that Crane Hollow owns in these maps as the red color that's on here. And then everything else around it is how the land is used around us. So the dark green is generally state forest land. The lighter green places are other state nature preserves. And then the purple areas are state parks. So lots of protected areas, all with different recreational scientific uses. Crane Hollow is a dedicated state nature preserve that is privately owned by Crane Hollow Incorporated. So I work for the nonprofit that administers the site, but we work hand in hand via an agreement with the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves to be a scientific state nature preserve. So ultimately, what that means is if anything ever happens to Crane Hollow Inc., the nonprofit, that land will go to the state. So the family that founded Crane Hollow has the promise that it will be protected forever and nothing will happen to it. Every day when I go to work, I have these guiding documents to help me figure out what to do. I have a board, I have an annual work plan, and we'll talk more about that later. But yes, I'm an employee, but there are just 2 employees at Crane Hollow for 2,000 acres. So we have to have a plan, or else, like Jennifer, about burnout. And the board does not want us to burn out, because that means they got to find somebody else. They don't want to do that. So all of these all these documents. I don't want to just glaze over them, but you can check out what they are. But it's everything from our articles of incorporation, which helps us, of course, be a 501c3, all the way down our strategic plan and our resource management plan. And you can see our articles of incorporation were done in 1979, and it took until 2007 to start on a strategic plan and resource management plan. These things take time. Do not be hard on yourself. It takes time to get your head around these ideas, so it's okay. So here's some really fun connections between the two of us. So Crane Hollow, in our strategic plan, it states that we will partner with other local and regional organizations and institutions, and that we will share our organizational experience. So I was super excited after 10 years of working at Crane Hollow, having this in our strategic plan, and now we found each other. I am so excited. So it's really wonderful for me, and I hope that we can share and that I can be helpful to you too. So I wanted to show you that even through our dedicated preserve, the highest level of protection that you can get on the state level in the state of Ohio, we still have all this stuff going on inside our preserve. So again, just like you all, you have right-of-ways. I mean, it happens. It's just the way it goes. And you can work together with all of those companies to make it a good partnership. We have structural, natural, cultural, history, management issues, just like you all do. I don't have the historical structures like you do, but I do have structures. And all structures, as you all know, come with their own gifts. And we are by the Buckeye Trail. We are only a 9-county hike away. So sometime, if you just head south on here, you'll end up at my doorstep. I'll see you there. And we also are connected by the Eastern Hemlock Forest. And this is the most amazing thing in my mind. So if you look at this map, you look first of all at the difference, the Ohio range of the Eastern Hemlock, and that's basically glaciated versus unglaciated Ohio. That's not a perfect boundary there, but that's a good way to think about it. And here's Hawking County, and Crane Hollow is right about here. And then, you go on up to Summit County, and it has these lines through it because back in 2009, when this study was, we thought that it was completely gone and that it wasn't here. Hello, it's here on your preserve. You have hemlock trees, and look at the rest of the state of Ohio. It is almost non-existent. So you are really lucky to have these trees, and lucky because of the habitat that they form that is rare in Ohio. So here's the range of the hemlock in that green color. The yellow counties are the counties that now have hemlock woolly adelgid. Hemlock woolly adelgid is an exotic bug that came in on landscaping plants. And it started with an infestation that they were able to find in this central to southern Appalachians, so in the Smokies. And now it has made its way up here. And I think 2012 was the first year that they found it in Ohio. It crossed the Ohio River. So now we have it here. And as depressing as I do find that, knowledge is key. If you just know that it could be here, that it is coming, then you can look for it. And if you look at the underside of the branches, you can see it there. We don't have it in Crane Hollow yet, but it's all around us, and we're actively looking for it. And if that's something that you all want help with, we'll help you actively look for it too, and then understand how to treat it. So when we look at how to manage the preserve, we look at the historic land use all the way back to the woodland period. We take all of that into consideration. We take into consideration the more recent history, like Guybersonville is all around the preserve. And all of our hollows have family names. I know you can't see them, but it's really interesting to say, well, in Crane Hollow today I'm going to go to Snyder Hollow. Well, that's because the Snyder family lived there. And we look back and we see who lived there, who used agriculture, who logged. You can then understand the use and the lay of the land better if you go back in time like that. This is just an interesting picture of the kiddos that went to school just right up the road from my office. There's the location of the schools. And then these are really cool too. You can look back at aerial photos and see the vegetation cover over time. So from 1938 to 1966 to 2015, the 2015 one is in color. It's a little easier to see. But you can see how agriculture and clearing of the land changed over time. And this is why Crane Hollow is today. So our founder, Bill Ellis, was the president of the Ohio Chapter Conservancy. So he knew that Crane Hollow was on this list from the Ohio Archaeological and Historical Society back in 1923, which was then the Ohio Historical Society, which is now Ohio Historical Connection. But they said Crane Hollow should be saved. And then the Depression hit. They were able to save Conkles, saved at Camp Odioqua. All those are saved in some way, but Crane Hollow was last on the list. So the Ellis family saved it. And here's Jane Ann and Bill Ellis. And then we have another cool connection because Jane Ann's father was also an inventor, and he invented the technology that's in your screw-in oil filter and your filter in your car. Here's our office, the green building, that big waterfall that you saw that's just below the office. So hint, hint, if you come to visit me at Crane Hollow, we'll go check it out. And then we also have a researcher house here down in the left-hand corner. And then these are some of our researchers. Gary is in the orange hat and Holly Couvert is in the hoodie. And they have found all kinds of species at Crane Hollow. This is one of our new species to science, Heliodromia cranehollowensis, and it's a dance fly. And I just think that's the perfect dancing is awesome, and that's the first new species to science for Crane Hollow. And then here's our ATBI, our All Taxa Biodiversity Inventory list. So this is everything that we have found since 2002. And we have over 10,000 species identified. We are really good at having parties at Crane Hollow. So last year was our 10,000 species party. It was really fun. And this is just part of our educational collection. We have a museum quality collection as well that has all the species listed. So that's a voucher collection that goes with our list. But this is our educational collection that we use to help folks understand better what we have. And so we do work with other orgs to collaborate, to do research. And we work mostly with Ohio University, Hawking College, Kent State, Wright State, even the University of Tennessee. There's a researcher there that studies springtails. And he really likes the fact that we are not impacted by highways. And so you would have the same type of situation here, because I bring in all kinds of stuff on trucks and have for years, as far as exotics, invasives, that kind of thing. And you would have that same kind of situation here, too. So I think that's all. Yeah, that's all I have for now.
Hopefully that's better. A couple quick housekeeping items. We want to make sure that you help yourself to food and drinks here, so you're welcome to get up and wander over and get refreshments. If you need to go to the restroom, there's a porta potty out this way and another restroom out this way. So our last meeting here that Heather and I were up for a while, it got kind of chilly in this room. So if you need to go over and warm up at the fire, that's a good option as well. So we are on schedule so far, and we already used one of our little cards, and Heather finished right up, so that worked great. Lynn Richardson is now going to speak to us about the history of Preserve. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. And so Lynn's going to talk to us about the rich history of this site. And when we put the agenda together, I was just counting up, we have 14 different speakers' presentations. That's a lot of information. We tried to put it in I guess, a logical order. And so it makes sense to have the history first. Most of you already know Lynn. I know that a lot of people that are speaking today, most of the audience knows, but we still are going to do just short introductions for each person. And I learned a lot just through the bios, and I was impressed with everybody's background, and I think that attests to the good agenda we have today. But Lynn, in addition to having a very strong background with the Girl Scouts, which makes her an ideal person to be the historian for the folk group, is, she served as a troop leader. She was a service unit director. She was on the national delegate for the Girl Scouts of Lake Erie Council, and she's been involved in a lot of different aspects of the Girl Scouts, and as you know, that's a really important part of the history of this site. I also thought it was really interesting that her background is in nursing. So if we have any problems today, we'll do, right, Lynn? Yes. Childbirth, right, childbirth. So hopefully no one needs that today. All right, Lynn, you're on. You want to walk around too?
Thank you. Okay. Well, another thing we have in common with Crane Hollow is we also have an aerial photograph, okay? So, all right. So thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a great crowd. History is cool because the story of a place can have tremendous influence on how visitors experience a place. It's about what you choose to emphasize, how you choose to focus that emphasis that's going to make a difference. And if you're taking notes, if there's one thing that you take out of my presentation from today, it's that things changed a lot, and things changed a lot even just during the Girl Scout era. And it's because the land didn't change that much, but it's the decisions that people that made the changes. So no pressure, right? Taking it from the beginning, we know very little about the Native American presence in this area. In fact, we knew nothing about it until Phil Winerka's study last summer. There was just no evidence of Native Americans that had been admitted to. I think it's possible that people may have found some arrowheads, projectile points over the years, but they just put it in their pocket and didn't tell anybody about it and went on home. So we assumed that there were Indians here. We just didn't have any information until this past summer, and hopefully in the future. In the early 1800s, the first permanent settlers here were different branches of the Oviatt family settled up in the northern one-third. This is north, by the way. The map is kind of adjusted funny more than what you're used to. A different branch settled in the southward. In between, there were different parcels of land that were farmed, but we really don't know too much about the families who lived there. Now, the Oviatt families has really great stories that are tied in with Richfield history and tied in with the great movements of American history. But all that stuff, even though it's connected to the property, the action happened off-site. So I am going to skip that 100 years because of the time constraints and move on to the 20th century. So in 1918, which was right before the First World War ended, the Neal family, CJ and Clara, who had a house in Cleveland, and CJ was a businessman in Cleveland, decided that they wanted to spend more time with their two little boys and a place in the country so the kids could grow up close to nature. And they decided to come on down. They looked around and they found an old farm, the old farm, on Broadview Road in Richfield. And so they bought a parcel right about here. Their house and their barn was right where the Giant Eagle is now. They got into growing apple trees, and they eventually kept buying more and more parcels, clearing them, putting in apple trees. So they owned not just this land, but about 300, 400 acres, it's uncertain, of apple orchards all around here. When their downstream neighbor wanted to put in a lake, he asked the Neals, can I flood your valley? They said yes. They even helped him do it. But that was in the mid-1920s. And once that lake was formed, the Neals decided to get rid of this house, turn it into a fruit stand and cider processing plant, and build a house overlooking the lake. And today North House, and Coach House was the Neals' garage. A few years later, when the oldest little boy grew up and got married, they built him a house also on the lake shore, and we call that house now Amity. So the Neals pretty much lived happily ever after, at least we're going to say so for the sake of this story, and we are going to move downstream and look at that downstream neighbor who was kind of famous. That was Jim Kirby. So Kirby was a self-taught engineer and inventor from the west side of Cleveland, although his mother's family had been in Richfield for generations. Kirby got his start in his career when he was about 13 years old. He took a class at the YMCA called Electricity and Magic, and that really inspired him and directed his career path. He became very successful inventing household appliances so that women would not have to work so hard and backbreaking labor day just to keep their house clean. He made his fortune at the age of 31 by inventing the spin cycle on washing machines. And at that point, he looked for a place in the country where he could live close to nature. He was 34 years old when he bought the old Oviatt farm. That's down here. Now we tend to ignore that there's on the west side of Oviatt Road, but there's about 30 acres over there. So Kirby bought this rectangle, was the start of his estate in Richfield. I'm assuming if you're here that you probably have some passing familiarity with the mill and the lake and the spring-loaded dance. All of those were experimental designs, and they all worked. So once Kirby had those things built and his house, he started buying more land. The first thing he did, this was the Lamson farm, this parcel right here. He bought that. So now this all became the Kirby estate too. Next, the Sapsford farm, 60 acres, right here. 1925, this was the Lehman farm. He bought that. This was all Kirby's property, 243 acres. He just loved to be close to nature. And it is said that newspaper reporters would come and visit and look at the old mill and walk around. And they said a lot of this was engineered. And even Sandy Norris found an area of the creek that looks like it was re-engineered and not natural. And there's no, Kirby did not leave a lot of records, and he was estranged from his family. So a lot of what we know is from patent records and from sort of obscure research that we're doing. We're still trying to find out a lot of stuff. What we do know is that Kirby lived here happily for about 15 years. The mill, the upper level of his workshop, and while he was working in the mill was about the most productive period of his life in terms of patents that he applied for and received. So in 1937, Kirby decided to move up the road for unknown reasons, and he sold this property to the Scout Council. The Cleveland Girl Scout Council had been looking for 13 years to find a place where they could hold a permanent summer camp. Their primary criteria was that the place have a lake so they could do some boating and swimming in the summer. They were ecstatic when they found the Kirby estate. Not only did it have a lake, but the dance hall on Springs was an already ready-to-go dining hall. All they needed to do was come in and build a kitchen and storage unit onto the back of it. Kirby's house was their administration area. They put in about 7 platform tent units, but they really didn't change much of what Kirby already had there. Oh, and the mill? The mill was sort of an excess property. What do you do with an excess mill? They turned that into an arts and crafts studio because it was so pretty. Now, the really interesting is the next transformation of the property. And this is something I think is really interesting because I think that there's some parallels to the transformation from the Girl Scout camp into Richfield. So, this whole thing was named Camp Julia Kroll at a time when camping was very popular. Within 10 years, this place was being used to capacity. Within 15 years, the Girl Scouts knew that they were going to have to get more camp land. And so they launched a huge fundraising campaign, and the goal was to buy another camp to build more facilities at Camp Julia Kroll to fit all these kids who are banging on the door trying to get in. This fundraising campaign took place in the year 1954, and it was successful in that they were able to raise enough money for another camp, which they bought in Macedonia. That was Camp Mars. But they did not raise enough money to put in any extra facilities at Julia Kroll. But that's okay. They made do with what they had. The problem came 3 years later. The Neals put this land up for sale, and the Girl Scouts had out all their resources to buy Margaret Bates. So what were they going to do? There was a contingent who said, this is nice, we own 2/3 of the lake, it'd be nice to own that other third, but honey, we don't have the money to do it, so too bad. Then there was another contingent who said, we have to buy this. If we do not buy this property, who knows what can happen? Somebody could come and build a whole lot of vacation cottages around the edge of the lake. Somebody could put in a factory. We have no control over it. So they didn't know what to do. And as we know, it was huge. And as we know, in the end, the Girl Scouts did end up buying this. They went into debt to do that. They had to get special permission to take out a mortgage on this place to buy it. Now, once they had this property, what were they going to do with it? Here was the old boundary, and the first thing they did was they said, well, we're going to let some kids camp over here. So they built a road, because the Neals, for some reason, I don't entirely understand this, the Neals previously sold the parcel of land that contained their driveway that went from Broadview Road back to the brick houses. So it wasn't there. So the Girl Scouts knew this. So the first thing they did was they put in a road right next to the boundary line so they weren't disturbing the apple orchard, because they bought this property not really knowing what they were going to do with it. And that's the part of it that reminds me of Richfield. They bought it because it was available, it wasn't in the plans, they didn't have, and they just had to figure out as they were going. So here's this road they put in right next to the boundary there, and then they're like, well, this can only go so far. We're going to have to swing it around the edge of the lake and cross the creek, and then we could get to the houses here. And that's what they did. And this is Gemini Road. So if you ever wondered why Road was as kind of weird as it is and why is it going into nowhere, that's why. It's because it was that they were going around the edge of the orchard. And it took a while for them to integrate this piece of property into the rest of it. And what they did, now they could have said, Camp Julia Kroll has just been expanded by 30%, and we had to go into debt to do it. Boo. But instead, there was another group of people who, after a few years, said, you know what? This has the potential to be an international destination. This has the potential because of those brick houses, because we have the whole lake, because this is beautiful land. And so that group kind of won. They said they changed the idea of the place because they changed the usage. They said, we're going to build a new dining hall right here. We are standing in it. We're going to build a pool. It's right over there. They put in some new units. They made this be a place where people could come and gather, and it could be versatile. And not only did they change that, they said, this place is so awesome, it needs to be a different camp. And so they gave it a different name. They named it after the upper lake that started all the trouble, and they called it Hyleka. So then, now this was interesting. This is again about perception. The land didn't change, the perception changed. So the boundary between Camp Julia Falls and Hyleka, people stopped thinking of it being right there. They thought of it as being right here at the gas station. And that continued for a lot of the time that a lot of us who had been Girl Scouts, that's what we thought. Here's crawl. Another thing that changed is access points. When this was Kirby's land, he put his driveway where people would get a nice view of the nature and of all his Kirby stuff, right? So, here's Kirby's original driveway. Now, Girl Scouts used that driveway for a little bit, but in short order, I don't know why they changed it, but they did. They decided to make the Ophir Road. Then, when they got this extra property, but they didn't know what to do with it, they just needed access, that's when they built the Gemini Road. And that's where they told people to go. And then, when they had this big grandiose plan of making this an international camp, that's when they put in this big long driveway that you all came down today. It did not exist before 1965. Okay, so then, in the 1970s, security became an issue nationally, and so they put up a fence all around the camp. In the 1980s, they realized that horseback riding was becoming so popular that they needed to have a permanent equestrian program, and so they had to poke a new doorway in the gate to accommodate the space. Because they weren't just having little horseback riding camps. Kids were coming here to just have separate horseback riding. And then in the 1990s, when they needed to, camping was becoming a little bit less popular because you didn't have to go out in the woods or to a lakeside to get cooler. People had air conditioning. The Girl Scouts, as well as a lot of other organizations, kind of had to up their game, and they put in the challenge course, which is behind Mabel Smith, and we all are kind of pretending it's not there because we don't want people climbing on it, but it's still there in the woods. So then, at the turn of the century, 21st, Girl Scouts again decided that they needed to rethink how they can reach more girls. They wanted to reach a greater percentage of girls, and camping didn't seem to be doing the trick for them anymore, and so they restructured the program and had a council merger. And so what they did was they knew that they were going to be getting rid of some camps. They formulated, by this time the Cleveland Council was called Girl Scouts of Northeast Ohio. It expanded over 18 counties. They had 14 camps. And they said some of these are going to have to go, and they formulated a called Vision 2012. The Vision 2012 committee was taking a good hard look at camp properties. And it was a really interesting process because a lot of the stuff that was here we took for granted. We took it for granted so much that we didn't even really see it for what it was. But this process forced us to take an objective look at everything. And the first thing the Girl Scouts did was they had a survey to the girls and the adults, what's your favorite camp? Now, ironically, Kroll-Hyleka was far and away the favorite camp. And interestingly, the feature that people remembered the most, Dance Hall on Springs. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but everybody remembers that. So it's an iconic memory for a lot of people. The committee further analyzed the results of what people said and did surveys of the property, and they realized that these Neal houses, just as in the early 1960s, valuable for the imagination that they inspire. And the old Kirby estate, surprisingly, had an amazing potential for engineering education. A spring-loaded dance hall, a patented lake, and a mill that generated hydropower, those things were rocket science. But their value lay in the fact that they were approachable, friendly, and fun. The designs are all simple enough for a kid to understand once they're explained, so they could be gateway demonstrations of applied physics and energy production. However, in spite of those things, other forces came into play, and Kroll-Hyleka was liquidated along with several others in the council and across the country. The highest bidder, when this got put up for sale, was the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, but their interest is in protecting land, not in owning it. The Conservancy had to find somebody else who would buy the land from them before they could buy it from the Girl Scouts, and they were not able to find anybody here that they had. When their option was about to run out, Friends of Kroll-Hyleka said that we would hold a pledge campaign to buy the property and raise the money. We went to the Historical Society, Richfield Village Council, and Richfield Township trustees and asked for endorsements for our pledge campaign. And they said, what are you talking about? Show us. Show us what you got. And we did. We gave the officials a tour, and there was an amazingly positive reception. And then the idea came forward that we would have a public open house, and that was in October 2013. The amazing reaction was overwhelming. However, we did enough pledges to save the property. We had a meeting at the Historical Society shortly after we knew that we had failed, and Meg Splifkak stood up in this meeting and said, we've got to do something. The friends need friends. So Mike Wheeler and Rick Hudak on Village Council were absolutely instrumental in keeping this idea open and viable, and the following year the Village Council asked the Conservancy to ask the Girl Scouts for more time, and the Girl Scouts granted a one-year extension. At that point, a lot of things happened, and I could spend another hour just on that. I can't do it. But the RJRD was formed, and they took the decision to the people. The campaign was chaired by Bobby Bashira, acting as a private citizen, and Sandy Apadoni. Approved talking points for the camp included the fact that this park was not just any park, it was historically significant. It had one-of-a-kind features and unique buildings, and it was an example of Ohio's ingenuity and entrepreneurism. Western Reserve Land Conservancy, after the vote passed and Richfield bought this, yay, thank you. The Conservancy helped RJRD apply for a Clean Ohio grant to help pay for part of the purchase. And if I had more time, I've got overlays on here that show where the part of the property that was purchased with Clean Ohio money, with state money. But basically, it's in the north here, and it kind of a big section doglegging around the wild ravine of going around the lakes. So it's got extra environmental protections on. They want you to use it. They want you to go there. You just can't have screaming billboards and build hotels and put a business in there. Next, the RJRD in 2015 applied to have the property designated as a historic by being listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. That is an effort that is still in progress. And in 2016, the master plan gave a lot of options to the people. When it looked like a lot of the options would involve extensive demolitions, the Richfield Historical Society, along with Ms. Stoner, put out this mailer to everybody in Richfield and reminded people that the reason that this property was saved was in large part because of its historic significance, and that involved a lot of the structures and involved the lower lake as a central historic element, and that is currently in the process of, thank you, RJRD. So that concludes my presentation, and I just want to remind everybody, all of you here, you're part of this history. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of things.
So hello, everybody. At this time, I would like to thank Lynn Richardson again, our folk historian, for meticulously researching and documenting all the magnificent rich history that lives here on our 336-acre public park. So can we give her another round of applause? And next speaking is Corey Ringall, our magnificent president of Friends of Crow-Hilaka. Corey holds a master's degree in architecture from Kent State University. Corey works at Paskovich & Associates in Cleveland. She's served on the folk board since 2010, and she's been president since 2013. She became familiar with the property, and it piqued her interest in the historic structure when she was camping on the property, correct? And it really made an impact on her life decision of being an architect. She loved the homes, and the girls used to call those homes castles. Well, I think they still do, really. In 1997, Corey and other members of her Girl Scout troop built the orienteering course that's still workable today, right? So Corey, we can't wait to hear what you have to say about the architecture.
Thank you. Now, full disclosure, I am not a licensed architect. In fact, I am studying for my boards as we speak and be taking my first one on Monday. Here's hoping. But as part of this process, I'm not going to claim that I know everything. But I have been practicing as an intern, an apprentice for 10 years, and I know a little bit. So I'm going to start off with, if anything, I hope people walk away with 3 concepts today. The preservation is maintaining what you already have. Planning will make restoration decisions easier, and once it's gone forever. So we'll be going through that. So the first step is knowing what we have, and don't be intimidated. I promise to keep this short. We have a lot of buildings here. I was disappointed when everybody said, hey, there was over 100 buildings, we can't save them all. And I was like, over 100? There's no way there's over 100. But then they clarified if you count every tent platform, if you count every shed. I'm like, well, yeah, if you count every, of course. So this is a lot, but keep in mind, these are all picnic shelters that are in mostly good condition. They may need a few touch-ups, but they're not bad. And I try to divide them into historic structures, minor cabins or longhouses, usage buildings for office and maintenance garages, and then some of the programmable space. So bear with me. We're going to go quick. All right. First off, Kirby Mill, one of the most iconic buildings here. Here are some other views, the water wheel, and where it attaches to the dam along with the swinging bridge. I really want to keep this positive, but the first step to preservation is maintaining what you already have, and therefore I am going to talk a little bit about some of the things that do need to get maintained, and maybe wherever you put them on the priority list, they just need to be addressed at some point. It's not inclusive, it's just points. So on the dam, or excuse me, Kirby's Mill, most people are aware that last year folk, as well as some other volunteers, put in a drip catch. The wall you're looking at is the wall that's facing the water. There's a small leak at the top, and water is coming through. Not a lot, but some flaking of the concrete is occurring. So our catch system, very sophisticated, as you can tell. But it worked. It got a lot of water off the floor, and it dried things up really fast. Obviously you guys are already working on that, so that's wonderful. The swinging bridge, when we had out our structural engineer, he was amazed at how well the cables had been preserved. There's a steel plate on the other side, a little bit of corrosion starting, but in grand scheme of things is in good shape. Really the only thing that needs to get reworked on the swinging bridge is the handrail is not meeting code at the moment. But otherwise is in good condition according to Olin and Reed. Kirby House, Adirondack style and lots of wood interior, is in pretty good condition. The foundation definitely needs some work. Part of that preserving what you already have, folk did go in and we put some plywood around the windows. We're not done yet. The upper windows still need to get done, but it has been deterring broken windows for the time being, that or the weather. Another interesting thing I wanted to point out is each of these posts have an electrical receptacle in them, and it's a four-pronged, very strange, and we believe that's related to the hydropower across the way. Oh, excuse me. But there is a lot of water damage going on in the basement right now, and that should get rectified sooner than later because once your foundation is gone, eek. This all right here is at the corner of the house. Before the slide prior, you can see the dining room hutch in the back. That's between there and the kitchen. So here's under that hutch, you can see some water coming down. This sidewall is actually under an exposed slab on the exterior patio, and this is an opening in that said patio. So here we are last summer cleaning that out, and that opening is this right here. Do not do this, but you can lift this up and jump into the basement at the moment. That should get secured ASAP. And then, of course, this exposed slab with an opening underneath, that's bringing in water at the moment. And I'm sure having all this vegetation, we pulled off, Judy, what was it, like 4 inches of sod? That probably was a step in the right direction. But maintaining this, it's going to be work, or at least getting some kind of waterproofing into place so that you don't have any further damage. And that dining room hutch, that wood bit that we saw was just corner here. So there's a lot of water that needs to be remediated. We're already 2 in. See, we're flying, folks. This is Cricket's Corner. This is Kirby's boat landing. It is very charming, so cute. Great picnic shelter right up near the front. So if people are coming with a picnic, they don't have to go very far. A beautiful place overlooking the lake. It definitely needs some work. The briquette is having some damage. The floor is having some wear to it. But it's a small shelter. It probably wouldn't take much to fix it up a little bit and have people using it and taxpayers enjoying the fruits of their payments. Garfield, from what I've seen, is in pretty good condition. This is the interior of Garfield. Now, this was taken a while ago after we swept and cleaned it up. But you can see that we're looking at the back wall, so you can not see the chimney. The chimney's in the back, and then from there, this was the Garfield. This is when they added that kitchen on. When Lynn was describing the Girl Scouts turned this into a dining hall, this is where they added on the kitchen. Now the kitchen, the floor is rotting out. It's not in great shape. Kids are breaking in there. Again, security and getting that off there so you don't have to worry about any more damage happening to this beautiful, iconic building that people really seem to form memories. It has a cute little cook's cabin in the back. It's in great condition because it's barely anything. Oviatt House has a lot of challenges. It's open at the moment and getting in a lot of water, but it's the oldest building on the property. It's from 1836. I'll leave that to your. Moving on to the north, Amity House. A lot of people are aware that last summer we went in with some volunteers and did some shoring. Here's the back of the house. This is now getting into Normandy style, so a little bit of architecture history. Tudor was very common in England, and as you start into France, things started to get a little bit more stucco and things of that nature. There was a style called Normandy, which is like a mix between the English and the French, and that's Amity and North. So you can see that it has some Tudoresque details, but definitely is not a Tudor. So Normandy style. But yes, a lot of people are aware that we have a buried sill plate, and we'll jump ahead. So this is your housing construction. It's not exactly this. This is from Google. But you have your floor, you have your rim joists, you have your exterior sheathing that comes over your rim joist and your sill plate, and this is where your earth should be. And this is where the earth is on Amity House. So all that moisture is getting held up against the rim joist and the sill plate and coming through. And you can start to see that there's some rot here. And once that goes away, you don't have a floor anymore. So we did put some shoring into place. And you know, does that pressing? Absolutely. But what gives me hope is you should have seen how many people were out there that day. There was like 20 people in that basement lifting up all this wood to put in a temporary beam. That tells me a lot of people care about this building, and so it's worth the investment to fix it up. North House is just north of Amherst. Also has the same issue with the buried sill plate. So this is the interior of North House, looking in the living room. And the little bit of history they have is they wanted to make it nautical themed. So if you were to flip this picture upside down, it almost looked like a boat hull. And then they have some nautical details. It's a beautiful house. But it has fallen victim to some water damage as well as vandalism. And so a security system to keep it in good shape would be wonderful. And then the front door where you walk in and there's a kitchen, if you peer inside the window, you can see the kitchen sink and all that. This is the foundation just below it. So you can see that there's a little bit of rot on this sill plate. And you can see this is the start of the water, and this is looking down. There's already been some effervescence forming, and the water damaging the clay block. I don't want to make people nervous. I live in an old house from 1928. We have a wet basement. We have clay block instead of concrete block. And the way the bricks are formed, there's a horizontal cavity instead of, we've seen a cinder block before, the cavity is vertical. So if water does happen to get in there, it leaches down and through. But when you have the clay, it's horizontal, so it tends to hold water longer. So you are going to get some water damage. You are going to get water, not water damage, inside. But this level is not good. This is the front door, not the kitchen side door, is over here, and there's a bedroom off to the side. And you can see where, again, there's some damage, and this is directly below it. You can see that the water is coming through this giant hole and coming down. And this is a Corey-sized hole. So if you just need a scale, it's about this big. It's pretty large. So, I mean, really, if we look at the first 5 or 7 houses that we've looked at, security and water remediation are big first steps to be taking if we're going to preserve these historic structures that are kind of what makes this property unique. We have Coach House, which I'm not going to say is in immaculate shape. It definitely needs, Baldwin Wallace has expressed some interest, so hopefully that'll be a quicker fix than the other buildings that need some swaling and foundation work. The inside and backside of Coach House. And then we have some minor small cabins. We have Chagrin Valley, and then I bet you can't guess what Gemini cabin looks like. So those are in pretty good condition. And then we have Hilltop House, which is another long cabin. It has these built-in Murphy beds, but they'd be great for large groups camping or classes. We have Gund Hall, which they do want to fix up, but it's in good size. Gets a lot of use, even though it's not all the way done being fixed up. The park office and maintenance garage are under work, and then the pack out and volunteer office are getting fixed up and maintained, are in pretty good shape. We have the summer horse barn, which the OHC has been, they held the Derby days there. It's again in good shape. They've been mowing it and taking care of it a bit. Buckeye Trail around the Adirondacks, I know that they have been also maintaining the trail going up to it, and I believe that there's some sites back there. And then we have some other program spaces like the Boathouse, which LL Bean used during their and Sealy Cabin, which is just next to it. They've already started to take down the siding and turning it into maybe a picnic pavilion or some kind of open space instead of a cabin. There's the pool and the bathhouse, which I believe the RJRD recently talked about draining the pool. And then we have the shelters, which again are in good shape, used for camping a lot. And then yes, there's a lot of shelters that are very repetitive that used to have platforms around them, but would make great picnic shelters. How am I doing on time? All right, good. See, that wasn't painful. That wasn't bad at all. There's like 2 things to do here. We're fine. All right. So one of the things that I do when we have an architect, a person come into our office and talk about what do they want, we kind of talk about programming first. And once they make a decision about programming, then a lot of the other decisions that come down the pipeline make a little bit more sense. And we're going to go back to first year architecture school. One of the things they teach you is public, semi-private, and private. So if you're thinking of a personal residence, you have your outside space, you have your living room and dining room that people come in and hang out in. That's your kind of like your public space that gets a lot of use. You have your semi-private, which is kind of like your kitchen and living room. It's not completely off limits, but it's not where people kind of come into your house usually. And then you have your bedroom and your bathroom that are a little bit more private. So when you're space planning, you kind of divide it up into where do you want people to see the most, what's a little bit more private, and what's very secluded. And I've started over the years talking to different people, recognizing that maybe there's a couple different types of people that are using the park. And I don't know this, I'm just guessing based on what I've heard in the past. So obviously, the most important one is the Richfield resident. A lot in taxes, they need to have full usage of this park as much as possible. I hear the RJRD mention that quite a bit, that that's their highest priority is park pride and getting people excited to be out here. But they've also been renting to scout groups, church groups, anybody who's willing to come in and do some work. They want to encourage people to do some camping and large group. And then lastly, they've already started talking about how to fix up Gund Hall, and that they're very interested in offsetting the tax base, the taxpayer's responsibility and tax burden by using this as a rental facility. And if they did use it as a rental facility, it probably wouldn't be the same kind of rental as a Boy Scout troop. It'd be weddings or family reunions or something you'd want a bit more of a private experience, I'm guessing. Flash forward to here's the park. And I was glad that Lynn talked about how the park has evolved over the past 80 years to a century. There's a lot of driveways here. There's an entrance here, there's another flagpole entrance here, there's big roads here, there's gates all the way around. It's really evolved. And for the past 4 years, 5 years, 4 years, this main entrance has really been the forefront, and it takes you right to Gund Hall. But when you're having events, if somebody was having a 5K race here, it may be hard to configure parking and how to get people who want to just go for a walk with their dog versus people who are attending an event versus people who are dropping off their kids to go camping. You're trying to fit a lot of usages into just one space. Maybe sometimes it makes sense to divide that up so that if you're here for one activity, you come in and you park near that activity. If you're here for another activity, you come in through another entrance and use that activity. It may evolve. I don't know, but I'm just putting out there that when you start making those kind of decisions about who is this for, what do you want to get the uses out of it, and then how can you set up your space planning to accommodate those decisions, it may make making decisions down the road a little. So, for example, I'm just guessing, if you were to use Gund Hall as a private venue for weddings or reunions, whatever it may be, maybe this entrance is just for people who are coming here to use Gund Hall. Maybe since there's such an emphasis on the Kirby estate, and that's all the way down here, and not very accessible if you want to come for a picnic to drive on this, especially that huge hill at Garfield, maybe you start opening up this entrance again. Maybe there's some kind of a parking here for the public to use in order to really appreciate the lower lake and the Kirby amenities of the property. Some of those minor shelters that I showed you and small cabins are back here, Highly, the state. Most of that small shelter camping is up in this area. And there are, like Lynn mentioned, the Horse Barn entrance as well as the Gemini Road entrance. Maybe it makes sense for them to come off Oviatt Road and have a different experience coming in here. Again, I don't know how the decisions are going to evolve over time, but it's something to keep in mind when making decisions so that you're not limited to just one location. All right. Last but not least, once it's gone forever. So I showed you all those beautiful houses and then told you everything that's wrong with them, so I know everyone's just ecstatic. Uh, but, but it's really not that bad. There's a lot worse houses out there that need repair, and that small damages is fixable. Um, but once you bulldoze these buildings, they're gone forever. And Ken's going to talk a little bit more about that than I am. But I just wanted to throw out there that there's lots of studies on why it's important to save old buildings. And something that I did get excited about is I belong to a group called the Society for Classical Art and Architecture. And I going to a presentation by about Jane Jacobs, who is somebody who it was a woman planner and architect from the 1920s and 30s. And there was a push between the wars to go into more practical architecture, to simplify design, to get rid of the detail, because we could house more if we had simpler designs that you could build quickly, prefab, and we all know what mid-century modern, clean lines, it's a way different style, and that was kind of the intent. Jane Jacobs kind of came in and said, hey, I appreciate the idea that we're housing everybody, that we're trying to find simple design, but these new buildings are not pleasing, and you can see that people are being negatively affected in these mid-century modern buildings. It doesn't have the same charm, and you wouldn't think that charm was that important, but it is. And so these old buildings are, they're a good thing to have around. So without further ado, I'm going to have Ken Bowman come up and take us home.
How you doing? I'm Ken Bowman. I work for Cuyahoga Valley National Park. We also have the Buckeye Trail too, so we have another connection. We have a lot of buildings in our park, historical. I'm an historical of the park there. And we've done a lot of preservation, and we've done a lot of buildings where we've mothballed them for the time being for either the lack of money at the moment or for we don't have a use for them yet. And that seems to be kind of what's going on here. So I'm talking a little bit about what we would do for that. And what we found is most important is the roof on the building. If it's leaking, you've got the rot that comes in. You think you just got a little bit of plywood and you start tearing into it, and you've got a lot of money there. So the very best thing you could do is get a temporary roof on. It could be a tarp if it's a couple of months. It could be steel if it's going to be a few years, or you can put a permanent roof on if you know what you want to do there. And then the same thing with the roof is the gutters and the downspouts would be, once they clog up, your drains are clogging. You're back to all the pictures she's been showing you, these basements here that are getting rotted. She brought up sill plates and that rotting away. It could be real easy, or that could be a very big problem, and there's no point in letting it happen and then fixing it later on. It's better to protect it right off the bat. So the very best thing you could have in a building is it occupied. If somebody's living in it that can take care of it, that can see that the water tank's leaking, that the roof's leaking, that the heat's gone off, whatever. You have somebody with eyeball. It'll keep the critters out. It'll keep the vandalism down to extreme minimum. I don't know, we can't do that here yet because of the septic system isn't up to stuff yet, but whenever that is, that'd be something to consider. So you also have your drain lines too. Everybody thinks you're thinking about your supply lines, turning them off if you're not keeping it occupied. But with drain lines, you have P-traps, and if you let the P-traps dry out, you'll get sewer gases up in the building. Could be some serious problems there too. So I was told to keep it sweet here, so that's what I'm doing. But well, I'm a carpenter there, so and we have a lot of historic buildings. So it's a lot of fun to do it, but it's also a challenge. You can't go down to Lowe's for a lot of the material. You are usually custom milling some moldings up to matter. Even your framing timbers are 1 5/8, 2 by 4s, 2 by 4s, that type of thing. So you're not going down and grabbing them. So it's always again, it's so much easier to keep it from rotting than to go back and replace it later on. And that's kind of where a lot of these buildings are, is if we could get them so that they're even if there's not a use for them right now, if you can keep them first and keep the vandals out and keep the animals out. You have what we've found in the park, we get the bats, we get the birds. They have, when they start putting their excrement in there, you can't, it's all got different diseases in it and different funguses that'll grow. And raccoon feces is, gives you, is it plasmosis, I think it's called. But yeah, so this park here is, these buildings are absolutely phenomenal. You guys are lucky to have them, and I hope you can take care of them. So we can take care of them. Thanks.
Oh, I did? Do I get a sticker? Okay, you're down. I feel pretty good.
All right, so I think I scared them. They both finished up way too fast, so we have a few minutes. We could actually take, say, 2 or 3 questions right now if somebody wants to do that, and then we're going to get Chris on early. So, sure. Yep, I can do that. Does anybody have any questions right now for either Ken or Corey, or we can just keep moving? One in the back.
Elizabeth asked what was the concrete slab for in the back between the dining room, kitchen, and the new office that was built at Kirby House. And actually, I don't know. I know that there's a little stained glass off to the side of the buffet in the dining room, and we weren't sure if maybe they would pass food through and have a picnic. We do know that Kirby had a very beautiful garden system in the back there, so I would imagine that it was just like any back patio. I will throw out my personal experience at my office. We did have to do a design for somebody who wanted to put, people make crazy, a sausage manufacturing room in their house, because we all have one of those, right? But they wanted to put under their front porch, and the insulation and the steel rebar that we had to put in order to maintain the concrete in place, in order to have a dry space underneath, was very challenging and took a lot of research and engineering. I'm not saying it's impossible. We could probably just put some visqueen up to the underside and redirect the water out, but that's something that I think would be a good idea to bring an architect or an engineer in to find out what's the best way to either get it out of there and fill in underneath, if that's a possibility, and just get rid of that risk hazard, or find, something needs to be done, because that's a challenge. More than just, there's no roof over it, so any water that hits that concrete has to find a way to the ground somehow. Bob? You know, coal chute, that's what I thought too. But it'd be nice to bolt that down somehow. I like how you think, Joni. Oh, I'm sorry. Joni also said that maybe it wasn't just for a coal chute, maybe it was also for ice blocks to go down into the basement tiny box. Is it time?
Any other questions? One more. Otherwise, we're going to get Chris on here early because he only has 15 minutes. All right. Well, we're going to now. So between the first 2 speakers, we've been talking about the history and the buildings. Now we're going to talk for the next 2 presentations a little bit more about the biological diversity that's on this site. So keep in mind everything that you've heard about the history and the buildings. That's to think about what you want to say, because I'm already overwhelmed. So if you're not overwhelmed thinking about what this group is going to do to save all this buildings and biodiversity, you're going to be more overwhelmed when you hear about all the great biology and natural science that we have here. So Dr. Chris Stanton from Baldwin Wallace University is going to talk to us, and he could talk easily for an hour on this topic. He's only got 15 minutes, and so he's going to tell you a little bit about what he and his students have studied here. He's been at Baldwin Wallace since 2001. Currently teaches biology, general zoology, and invertebrate natural history. He also leads trips abroad to Iceland and Costa Rica. He holds a bachelor's degree at Wittenberg University in English and both a master's and a PhD in entomology. So what he's going to be talking about, I believe, specifically whatever he can squeeze in 15 minutes, is what he has learned about this site. And keep that in mind as we go through the day, because after him, Carrie and Neil are going to talk a little bit more about streams and the aquatic. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. I've been exploring this property since 2015 when Beth Sanderson first introduced it to me, and so I started coming in and hike a little bit off the trails just to poke around and see what all is here. And so I'm going to try to summarize this in 15 minutes. I'm going to kind of reorient ourselves with this map here, which came from the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. So if we look at this red border, it's just like the map that Lynn had, but we've twisted it a little bit. So here's 303 coming in down here on the south side, Oviatt Road running up here, and then Broadview Road and the entrance right there. So north is to the top now. This is the upper lake right here. It looks kind of brown. It doesn't always look brown today. Lower lake is down here, and then the stream connecting it. This outline that's shown here in red is only 210 acres that the Western Reserve was looking at. If we add in the other parcel, which is up here, there's a faint green line here, that's how we get to the 336 acres in this parcel on the other side of Oviatt Road. We are in the northwest corner of Summit County, so we're real close to Cuyahoga County and real close to Medina County. We are within the Rocky River watershed, and I'm not going to say much more about that because you're going to hear from Carrie about the watershed, where the water flows on this property. But the key to this property is that there are multiple habitats in a relatively small area. So it's not uniform across the board, but lots of different pockets where different species are living. So let's start off with the terrestrial habitats. Those are the ones on land. And again, from the Western Reserve report, and this bright green area that covers the majority of the property are mixed hardwood forests. And so that's a mixture of the typical tree species that we have around here: beech maple, oak hickory forest, ash, cherry, poplar, a lot of those trees scattered in this area. And looking at just the 210 acres, 138 of those are in mixed hardwood. The old fields are this orangish color here. This includes underneath the power line cut, 21 acres there. This is an important habitat. There are a lot of things that not live in a forest, so they have to live in fields. They need the sun, they need the warmer temperature, and so that's another habitat. About equal in size is the mowed areas, the maintained section of the property. That's also another habitat and a feeding area for a lot of species that will come out of the forest and feed on the grass. We have a couple planted softwood or pine forests scattered around the property. We think these were planted by the Girl Scouts for Christmas tree sales. They've been allowed to grow up, and so there's white pine, Scotch pine, several species of spruces scattered around on the property. There was a mention of the hemlock, and there are some small little pockets of Hemlock Cove habitat. And hemlocks need very cool, wet habitats, and so some of the deeper ravines are where the hemlocks have been able to survive. And so there are, if you add it all up, about 5 acres of that habitat. And then a last one that was the shrub scrub, and these are areas where shrubs dominate, like honeysuckle. Again, this is important for nesting habitat for certain bird species. We break all this up to see what we're dealing with on this property. Mixed hardwoods by far dominates what we have. And so the other habitats are shown in those other colors. Of the forests that we have, though, some of them are very high quality. They're mature forests. They're kind of rare. And then some of the forests, not so good. We have everything in between. We have a mixture of ages. But overall, think about this property, think of it as being forested. When we get to the aquatic habitats, I'm switching now to a map that the Summit County Metro Parks produced. And we still have the upper lake up here, slightly larger, listed as 8 acres. Lower lake at 6. There's the primary stream that comes in at the north end into the lake. It flows down through the ravine into the lower lake and then out of the property over here, eventually getting to the Rocky River. There are, in these low areas here, several streams that flow in and join that main stream. Sometimes they dry out during the summer and fall. After a rain event, they're full. Right now, if we went out today, they would have water in them because we have a lot of melting snow and rain. There are also seeps. This is an important habitat. This is where water seeps out of the ground, usually on a hillside, and that's a really important habitat for salamanders and aquatic organisms, or semi-aquatic. There are a few areas that we would call wetlands, but we need to do a lot more work on this. There are some cattail wetlands on the Oviatt. On the other parcel over here, there are some vernal pools. These are areas that fill up with water about a foot deep, but then dry up during the year. And interest in doing some what's called wetland delineation on the property. We go in and we map, University of Akron's interested in doing this, map exactly where the wetlands are. Again, really important habitat. I also want to mention, as far as aquatic habitats, the old swimming pool, which is on the hill over here. It's crumbling, it fills up with snow, it looks really murky. It's a really important breeding habitat for salamanders and some other things that have gone in there. We've taken out a lot of things from that pool, and they keep going back in and laying their eggs in there. So they are used to that being there. Been using it for years. There's also a pit that was dug out, I think, to put wood in and burn. Was that the initial? It filled up with rain. The clay there holds the water. It's a couple feet deep, and now it's a really important habitat and breeding spot for frogs, turtles, things like that. They have definitely colonized that area. Okay. There have been several biological inventories that have been conducted on the property. Western Reserve has done a couple based on visits that they made in 2012, 2014, and 2015. Judy, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, helped with this and added her observations in 2014 and 2012. Off and on over the last few years, the Cleveland Metro Parks has come in to shock fish in the lakes, give us an idea of what diversity we have, and then move some of those fish around. For the last couple, we've been doing studies with students, and each of the studies are a poster taped somewhere on a window around here. If you have a chance and you want more information, you can take a look at those. Adam Beekler wrote up a report last fall. I'm borrowing some of the information from that. And some of the information I'm talking about comes from a naturalist project. And that just started in May last year. So let me just give a quick plug for this. This is open to anybody that wants to start an account. You can have this iNaturalist app on your phone or on your laptop. You can join the Richfield Heritage Preserve project. And when you're out hiking around and you see a plant, an organism, anything, you can snap a picture of it and upload it. That will give us a mark for where it's located, the time of year. It's then made available to be identified by experts online. And so I have this kind of screenshot here of the property. Each one of these little marks are observations that somebody has made of a plant or an animal or a mushroom. This is a clickable map. You can zoom in. You can pick out each individual spot and look at what the organism is, information about its natural history, when it was present, when it was blooming, for example. So far, 158 observations, 116 species, but only 13 people have participated. So I'm hoping that this is something that is going to become more common, because this is a really important tool for documenting biodiversity and what we have here. So if anybody's interested in joining us, I can give you information later. All right, so what do we have? What do we know so far? As far as plants go, 186 total plant species have been documented. The majority of those are the non-woody plants, so little flowering things out in the fields, things like goldenrods. As far as trees and shrubs, 56 species. 8 species of fern. I think there are more out there than just that. And so far, only 4 species of mosses and liverworts. We need to have more plant experts that get out here and botanize. It's where they hike around, they identify these species. You can't really do this unless you're an expert. And so I really think that some botany experts need to be invited out to add to this list. It's not a bad list to start, but we have not identified everything that's growing here. And because of these different habitats, there are going to be more plants. But this is where we're at right now. The same can be said of fungi. We only have 6 officially recorded species, and I know that this category has a lot more. Of the mushrooms that have been identified, the morels have been found. This is something board needs to think about because a lot of people like to come in the spring and dig these up and then sell them. And I think you're going to probably need to have some kind of collecting policy on if you're going to allow the public to come in and dig these up, or is there going to be a bag limit like there are in fish, or what are you going to do with them? This is a group of organisms that really needs to be expanded, and the best way I think to do this is that there are mushroom clubs that like to go to properties and have their field forays, that's what they usually call them. And in the past, some of these groups have asked to come in to this property and do a listing, and they were turned away. But I hope the current board will allow these groups to come in and get this kind of information. We need to have it documented. Okay, as far as birds go, we've had a lot of people notice birds, and they'll send emails and stuff like that about what they've seen, but we have not concerted effort to document all the birds that are here. The species list right now is a little over 50, but I know it's closer to 100 if we really put some time into it. Some of the interesting species that are breeding here include the bald eagles. They've been here for a while. The northern junk, the bird pictured here, is a common winter resident here. Oh gosh. But they're breeding here. And there's a scarlet tanager. And there's a hooded warbler. A lot of birds. It's kind of rare to have these last two, the pheasant. It's because of the grassland habitat, those old fields. That's why they're here. But they're in decline. These are species that are disappearing around the world. Our mammal list is pretty good. A lot of this data comes from the trail camera work that I did with a student in 2016. 18 species of mammals, and then some number of bats. Bats here, but we have not been able to identify what species. Bats are, again, another group that's in decline, but they seem to be doing well here. The beavers, sign of good quality habitat. The gray fox is a species that's disappearing from Ohio, but we did get one on camera in 2016. Haven't seen it since. They hide. They're in the forest, and where they really like to hide is up in trees. This is the only fox that can climb trees and sometimes even have their dens up in the tree. There was some evidence in 2015 that possibly a black bear made a visit here and spent a couple days. We have some scat that indicate that it was here, and that's possible. Haven't seen any signs of it since. I'm going to show a couple videos here of what we got on our trail cameras. If I can get this to play. going to play for me. These are videos, but I'm just going to show you some stills. We have a lot of deer on the property. It was thought initially that the fence was keeping the deer number low, but they are definitely in here. They're definitely breeding, so we have a lot of deer. We do have coyote and red fox scattered all over the place. They are not, the red foxes are breeding on the property, the coyotes are not. They come in at night and hunt. There's just a handful that we see on a regular basis coming in through the fence. This was a video I really wanted to show. We have a very itchy raccoon. And every night, this was a camera that was set up behind Chagrin this winter, and there's this tree branch, and he comes through every night and scratches his head on this branch every single night, all winter long. And usually, if I had the video, he starts here and he kind of scratches his head all the way down. So I have hours of footage of not just the raccoon, but a lot of other animals, great horned owls on camera, things like that, that hopefully we'll get to sometime. Amphibians. Because of our good water quality, we have a lot of salamander species. The northern red, the salamander. These are not common around here, but we have the right habitat and the right water quality. 7 species of frogs and toads. Some people don't get excited about frogs, but I do. We have good diversity. This is good diversity. Reptiles. So far, what we've documented are some turtles that have been in the swimming pool. 4 species of snakes, nothing unusual here, but nothing venomous, nothing to be concerned about. From the fish shocking, about 12 different species of fish have been found. More diversity in the lower lake in terms of the number of species. Pumpkin seed has been found of them. The largemouth bass is what is bringing a lot of the fisher people in to catch. But we've done no inventory of the streams. We know creek chub is a fish in the streams, but no work has been done there yet. Invertebrates. This is a group that I actually like. I saved them for last. There are always more invertebrates than anything else. As far as insects go, though, dragonflies and damselfly diversity is really, really high here. This goes back to the good water quality and the different aquatic habitats. We do have a lot of butterflies and moths. That list looks small to me. That's going to grow. Make an effort to document these. The property does sit on the migration route for monarch butterflies. So in the fall, they stream across along Oviatt Road, and that's something to keep in mind as far as management goes. In 2016, we had those 17-year cicadas. Remember those? What was interesting is that on this property, species were found, and in good numbers, and that's unusual to have all 3 species. Yeah, there's spiders and snails and all that. All right. So my last slide here, just the take-home message is that because there are multiple terrestrial and aquatic habitats, a very good variety in general, if I have to generalize on what we're dealing with. It's hard to say if it's better than this until we have more data. I think if we continue to do more inventories or more research projects, our lists are going to grow, and I think if everything stays the same, the quality stays the same, we're going to see the interesting diversity, something that is going to bring people in. If we want to keep those species, we have to make some efforts to protect them. And still, again, I'm going to say we need some clarity on what the objectives are. Do we want to maintain the diversity that's here? Do we want to increase it? Do we want to improve that? Do we want better balance between forests and fields? That's a decision that needs to be made. And that's the last time you're going to hear me say that, by the way. Because at the end of the semester, I will not be at Bone Wallace anymore, and I'm not going to be working at Richfield, but I accepted a job at Mount Union as the director of their nature center and field station. So I'll miss you.
Thanks very much, Chris. He did an amazing job of trying to squeeze into 15 minutes. And the next two speakers are they're between lunch. So you know how that is when you're the last speakers before lunch. I'm sure they can do it. I do want to mention that a lot of what Chris talked about in terms of the diversity that we know already on the site, obviously there's still many more surveys that need to be done. Keep that in mind, because when I talk to you later, actually Adam and I both will be talking about invasive species. That is one of the biggest threats between maintaining the diversity that Chris talks about and, you know, the challenges of the large number of invasive species that we have at this site. I'm going to introduce both speakers at the same time because they hopefully have a plan of how they're going to transition. And I think we can go over into lunch just a little bit, just to make sure that they both have enough time to talk about the items that they're going to be discussing. But Carrie Davis, Dr. Carrie Davis, is also a professor at Baldwin Wallace, and she's been there for 6 years. She has a bachelor's degree and a master's in biology and a PhD in earth and atmospheric science. Her areas of expertise and teaching specialty are surface water hydrology, and related to water quality and flood hazards. She's going to talk about some of the work she's done here. And then I'm actually really pleased to see Neil Hess, because I've worked with him for many times at ODNR, and he's now involved in this project as well. He has 13 years in conservation and environmental restoration experience. He's completed 60 conservation land transactions. Some of those I was involved with him when he worked at Summit County Metro Parks and also Western Reserve Land Conservancy. He is now with EnviroScience as a part of their restoration, and he's going to talk about some of the work that he's done here as well. Carrie.
All right, try and keep this somewhat quick. I want to talk first a little bit about what a watershed is and what your specific watershed setting is. So hopefully most, if not all, watershed is. So the watershed is the land area that's going to drain to a certain point on a stream. So anything that happens in that land area is going to wash off and make its way into that stream. And so when we think about a watershed, we generally have kind of a topographic high around the edges, and so everything is going to drain or funnel down into that main stream. Think about where this particular property is located. I mean, as you're coming down the drive there on Broadview Road, you see the highest point in Summit County, right? The sign there. So we're certainly located up here in these headwater tributaries, so the very start of the watershed. So we're right on a boundary between two watersheds, and so we're in the Rocky River watershed here. And so in Berea, where I live, right, the Rocky River flows right through my backyard. But you guys are way over here on the edge of the Rocky River watershed. So anything that happens here is flowing downstream into the mainstream here, and then eventually out into areas that end up in the Rocky River, and eventually into Lake Erie. Whereas if we were just kind of on the other side of the road, we would no longer be in the Rocky River watershed. So that's one of the things that makes this area kind of hydrologically important, that anything that happens in the headwaters is going to make its way downstream into the main stem. So there's a real concerted effort to focus on making sure streams throughout the country are basically as clean as possible so that we're not passing all of that material farther downstream. So I've been involved with my students in a number of projects here since probably, I think, 2015, right about when Chris came on board. I started with a soils class out here taking some measurements, but been really focused on surface water since that's my area of expertise. So I've had my hydrology class out here, and some of our posters are around the room here, who've been doing some stream surveys, looking at erosion hazards and things like that. Been working with students on independent study projects, trying to set up some long-term water quality sites. Again, we need to know what the water quality is here. It appears from the biodiversity and everything that it's pretty good, but we actually wanted to document some of that water quality. Also, over the summer, started looking at some of the wells here. See, okay, if we get these wells up and running, how much treatment are they going to need? So we've been focusing on the well out at Chagrin and the Gund well here. Haven't been doing really Mabel Smith wells, actually probably the best of the three wells. And we've been looking for things like, you know, what's the pH, what are the metals, especially iron, in these looking at nutrients like nitrate and phosphates and various things like that in the wells as well as in the streams. Do a little bit of mapping where the streams are, and then focusing a lot on the fluvial geomorphology and what the shape of these channels are. So this is a map that one of my students made. It illustrates the topography of the region. So you can see, I mean, as you know, it's a relatively hilly area. We have that main perennial stream that Chris mentioned running through the property. We have a lot of these ephemeral streams that are only going to flow, you know, after heavy rain or this time of year. We see those. But we can see from the topography where a lot of those gullies would be in those ephemeral streams coming in. We've been sampling at these 4 green boxes. So we have an upstream location, kind of, if you're familiar with the area, you have that bridge going across here, and you have that kind of weir a wetland there. So we've been sampling the water coming over that weir, see what it's like. We've been sampling water coming out of the lower lake, see how that water quality changes as it goes into the lake versus out of the lake. And then doing a similar thing, sampling right by Garfield, the water coming into the lower lake, and then below the mill, the water exiting the property basically. How is that water changing as we're coming in and out of the lake? Again, plus the 2 wells. And what we found is the water quality is really good. It's not going to take a lot to get the water from the wells ready to be for drinking water or use in that way. The water quality we see in the streams has been really good as well. The big concern, though, is with erosion. And so one of the big problems, while the chemical parameters of the water are good, there's a lot of sediment. And as you know, the lakes often look kind of brown and murky, a lot of sediment coming in. A lot of the banks that we've surveyed have a lot of exposed soil, a lot of exposed roots, so the roots are not holding the material in particularly well. My students this fall, again, you'll see this on the posters, one of the things they looked at was the Bank Erosion Hazard Index. It's a number of parameters that you go through looking at bank height, root density, root depth, protection, all of that. And then you can put into these, figure out what the hazard is. And what my students found is that, if we go back one, they basically were looking at the mainstream, basically from the gas cut down to Garfield. And they found every bank that they surveyed along there was rated as either moderate, that was the best they saw, was a moderate to extreme bank erosion hazards. And they also did a lot of surveying to look at the profiles, and you can see that on some of these profiles we have very steep bank slopes. So when we have those really steep banks, the susceptibility of failure is particularly high. It's one of the worst areas of erosion. This is up, not on that main stream, but up kind of by the gas cut by Hialeah up there. Really bad in terms of the amount of soil being lost. If you've walked around at all, you know the roads are being eroded. A lot of those culverts are washing out. I just took this picture a couple of weeks ago. I had a student basically up to his waist in this hole where the road is down. Again, all that sediment is ending up in the streams and into the lakes. So we think about management. Those lakes are going to have to be dredged more often because they're filling up quicker with sediment. This is the road. It was just done in the fall and then starting to wash out. So when we think about the things of dealing with erosion, I mean, it's going into our lakes, eventually make its way into Lake Erie. Think about harmful algal blooms. Those nutrients are coming with the sediments. But just from a practical management standpoint, I mean, there's a lot of cost associated with this. Put in the road, and then the road washes out. And you have to do it again. Put in these culverts wash out. Got to do it again. You got to dredge the lakes. There's a lot of things that go along with that, as well as degrading the house. So basically what my students and I found, the water quality is good, but erosion and sediment have a lot of concern there. I could talk a lot longer, but I'm going to turn over to Neil, who's going to talk about restoration and hopefully follow with some of these themes.
Well, thank you for having me today. My name is Neil Hess, and I am with EnviroScience. We're an ecological consulting firm headquartered in the Stowe area, and I'm in the restoration group, and we specialize in restoring ecological systems In particular, we do a lot of work with streams, but we also do a lot of wetland restoration. We do reforestation, invasive species management, prairie restoration, really anything that involves restoration of natural systems. That is what we do. And I am going to just, so we have not studied the property, so I'm just going to talk generally about restoration, how we approach it, some different funding mechanisms for it. And usually I would do a PowerPoint first, followed with a short drone video, but it seems like I always run out of time before the drone video, and that's the coolest part. So I'm going to lead with the drone video today, and then I'll do as much of the PowerPoint as I have time for. Is that working? The drone video is of a stream restoration that we did at Highland Hills Golf Course in Cuyahoga County. And so it's, presentations right down here. It's actually a stream restoration with the active golf course. So we restored the stream. We actually had to put a golf course architect on our team to help realign some of the fairways and the holes. So that's the presentation, and I'm also going to see if I can do the Joel Bingham, a boss. He heads our restoration group. All right, here's the video. So this will show you, this is the pre-construction condition, and then it will move to the construction and then post-construction. But this kind of gives you a good flavor for a lot of what we do. You can see the stream, it's channelized. Gabion baskets, there's old infrastructure crossing the streams, you can see bridges, severe erosion right in through here. The stream is just unstable, and we see that a lot. A lot of streams, for whatever reason, are unstable, whether it's because they've been modified, whether it's because the water flows have changed, and then so they start to erode, trying to make themselves stable again, usually trying to create a floodplain for themselves, because that's what streams want. They want to have a floodplain. This is during construction. You can see we're putting meanders back into the stream. We're putting, these are riffle and pool sequences. That's a big part of what we do, is we put riffle and pool sequences back into a stream. Those sequences, they help control your grade, so they help to reduce erosion, and they are also really important for fish habitat within the stream. So you can see those. You can see, we take erosion silt fence while we're doing construction. We pump around, out of the sections that we're actively doing construction within. And then this is very shortly after construction. So the vegetation has not fully established at this point, but it kind of gives you an idea of what the finished system looks like. We had to rebuild a few bridges, so we've replanted riparian vegetation. The stream now has nice sinuosity. It has normal riffle pool sequences, much improved habitat, and this is a lot of what we do. Is try to get streams looking the way that they would like to be in a natural setting. Okay. This first introductory slide, this is probably one of our most well-known projects. This was the removal of the 2 dams in the city of Cuyahoga Falls on the Cuyahoga River. Briefly, when we do ecological restoration, the way we approach it, we try to be pretty holistic in the way we approach restoration. We're trying to set a foundation for the long-term recovery of those systems. So that's what we're trying to do. And I think one thing worth mentioning is the video you saw, that was an active golf course. The riparian zone was already in. So, we went through and we completely redid that riparian zone and did sinuosity. I have not hiked all of the property here, but my guess is a lot of the riparian zones are in good condition. So we do a lot of work in riparian zones that are in good condition. And what we do is we are very careful not to remove any more trees or vegetation than we have to. Be very discreet in working in those settings, and we actually like to work in those settings because those existing trees and vegetation, they're already going to give us some floodplain stability. so it's not like we're having to start from scratch replanting vegetation. This slide, the purpose I wanted to share with you is the process of doing restoration. Once a project is funded, and our first step is collecting the data to do the restoration work, do a lot of stream survey work, collect that existing data. We may have a reference reach that we collect data from as well, and that a reference reach is a similar stream, similar to the one that we're restoring, that is in good condition. So we're kind of trying to approximate the condition of that reference stream. Next is the engineering. We do a lot of hydraulic modeling of the stream system. It's important to make sure when we restore a stream that we're not going to make anything else worse. We're not going to hurt upstream or downstream landowners. So that's a bit of engineering and modeling to ensure that. There's also quite a bit of permitting. Our engineers permitting. Sometimes there is local floodplain permitting. So various things. How EPA has some stormwater permitting that we have to do is associated with our projects. Then once all the permitting is done, the engineering is done, then we can do construction. We prefer design build. That we like to approach ecological restoration. And basically that way you have a team that approaches the project and they work together instead of having us design it and then it goes out to bid and somebody else construct it. Constructing a stream isn't like constructing a road. So it's good to have entities doing the construction that are used to stream restoration. When you're done construction, you need to monitor it. The permits that you do the restoration with, they require monitoring for up to 5 years afterwards. And a lot of times we continue to monitor our projects for a long time after that even, just because when we can see how the fish are doing, the macroinvertebrates are doing in our systems, that helps to inform our current and future designs. So we'll continue to monitor, use that data to tweak the things that we do to try and improve the biological recovery of the system. Again, I just want to mention our goals. Number one is setting a foundation for long-term recovery. We want to address impairments. We want to improve the biodiversity of those restored systems. And then, we really look to try and work within the landscape. We don't want to make we're not coming in and trying to make the stream something that it shouldn't be. We want to work within that landscape and holistically restore the system. And the project in the background there is actually, that's the Little Cuyahoga River restoration that we did as a part of the Goodyear project a few years ago. Here's just a slide of the Highland Hills that you saw the drone video on. Again, you can see the gabion baskets. Those are failing. Very little habitat in that system, so that was a really nice restoration opportunity. This is a project for the Shelley companies in Portage County. This was actually a mitigation project. So they, because of some impacts that they had to restore stream and wetlands. And so this was a large restoration we did for them. The stream, you can see the sinuous stream in the background. That was just a ditch when we started, a straight ditch. None of the wetlands exist. We went in, we restored that ditch into a functioning stream. We restored the floodplain wetlands, reconnected that stream to its floodplain. That's a lot of what we try to do. We want that floodplain reconnection. This is an example of a project in Paulding County in the Great Black Swamp area. This was a farm field with a ditch through it, and we completely we restored quite a bit of wetlands, restored the stream. We also had some focus on removing nutrients. So we did what we call denitrification riffles. So we specially designed the stream riffles to improve the removal of nitrogen from the system. And I wanted to talk briefly about grants. There's several grants out there. Some of these aren't, wouldn't pertain to this area, but some of them do. So I just kind of have just an example of a lot of different types of grants here. Probably the ones that we use most are funding through the Clean Ohio program. In addition to purchasing land, that also finances stream restoration. There's a program through Ohio EPA that also finances stream restoration called the Water Resources Restoration Sponsorship Program. The EPA has a program called the 319 program, but you have to have a watershed plan in place to be eligible for that funding now. There's mitigation funding, stream and wetland mitigation funding that we use quite a bit to do restoration with. So there's a lot of opportunities. We are happy to. A lot of what I actually do is helping entities finance their restoration projects. So if somebody has a potential restoration project, I can look at it and try to see what grants or what mitigation funding might be a good fit, and then help them try to acquire that. I think since I've been doing this the last 10, 11 years, I've raised about $65 million for conservation and also restoration projects around the state. So there's quite a bit of money available to do these kinds of things. And just wanted to stress that this, it is a big investment that you're doing on these projects. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money. So there's a level of permanence, and the goal is to restore these streams so that you don't have to continue to maintain them. It's a self-maintaining type of process. And that's it. My information, I included my boss's information. If you would ever want to contact either of us, feel free to do so.
Thanks very much to Carrie and Neil for talking about these issues. Neil said he's going to be here for a little bit longer, so I'm assuming you can catch both of them over lunch. We are just a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can pick it up with lunch. So we're going to try and get back here to start at 12:45, and Beth is going to explain the lunch situation.
Well, the lunch situation is that we have like about a half hour and to go help yourself, and then we will come back. And I just want to say that I am so starstruck about all the assets that we have here on this park. But there's going to be a lot of planning involved in protecting those assets. Go eat!